About 6 in 10 Americans are currently living with at least one chronic condition. In fact, chronic diseases make up 8 out of the 10 leading causes of death in the United States. Dr. David Ruzicka with Priority Health is here to talk about some steps people can take to avoid chronic illnesses. Thank you, Dr. David Ruzicka, for being here with us.
My pleasure.
For those who may not know, what does it mean to have a chronic health condition? Share some examples.
Yeah, so a chronic condition is just like it sounds. It's relapsing and remitting, but not necessarily curable. So the time horizon for things that are considered chronic may be really months to years, whereas more acute conditions are a definitive onset and a definitive offset. So a few examples would be things like heart disease, right? Chronic heart disease, chronic obstructive lung disease, some inflammatory conditions of the bowel like irritable bowel syndrome or Crohn's. Things that are manageable, controllable, but not really like curable.
What causes most chronic diseases?
Yeah, so it depends on the disease itself. You know, we think about genetic factors, we think about environmental factors, but there's a lot of things that we can do or not to put ourselves at higher or lower risk. You think about nutrition and obesity, and that can predispose towards heart disease and high blood pressure and things like that. So there are things that we can do to modify our risk profile and affect a good outcome, which is really our goal.
Yeah, who is at risk? Some groups are at a higher risk.
Yeah, and so we'd kind of look at your family history initially. That would probably be one of the first things. If you're not suffering from a chronic condition, look at your family history and determine what is your risk and what are the things that maybe are endemic to your family, whether or not those are malignancies or I mentioned heart disease or high blood pressure. And if you kind of know that going in, then you can partner along with your physician and really identify what are those things that I can do to mitigate my risks of either living well with a chronic disease or preventing it at all from happening.
When a patient is newly diagnosed with a chronic condition, what are some of the first steps that you recommend that they take?
Yeah, so, and again, it's going to vary based on the condition that we're talking about, but there are a couple of universal truths, right? So if we think about attending to good nutrition, it's going to benefit everybody, regardless of what your condition is, if it's chronic arthritis or chronic heart disease. Making sure we're getting good restorative sleep, trying to stay active, avoiding toxins, tobacco, alcohol, things like that. So just living a good, healthful lifestyle is really going to impact a good outcome for whatever the chronic disease is that you're suffering or that you may be suffering from.
Yeah, any other steps that people can be taking overall for everyone? You kind of mentioned some key ones right there.
Yeah, I mean, those, and then it would drill down into the specific chronic condition. Like there's certain things that we would or wouldn't want to do for heart disease or things that we would or wouldn't want to do for, I mentioned Crohn's disease or like diabetes. You know, so there's going to be symptom and control specific according to the particular condition that you're talking about. But again, those universal things about good nutrition and exercise, getting restorative sleep, making sure our mental well-being is well taken care of, so that we're focusing on how we can help ourselves.
And Dr. Ruzicka, I was looking online and reading that chronic diseases are on the rise, not only for adults, but children as well.
Yeah, and so we talk about those things as the body ages or that affects adults, but children also, unfortunately, can have chronic conditions. We think more so things like congenital conditions. So when we think about heart disease in adults, well, there's a lot of children that are born with congenital heart disease. Maybe their valves of the heart muscle are not formed properly, and that can cause a form of congestive heart failure. Things like cystic fibrosis, sickle cell anemia, they can also have those same inflammatory conditions like Crohn's or irritable bowel condition. Allergies, asthma, bronchitis, those types of recurring type conditions, maybe controllable, but have, you know, a time horizon. You may develop that when you're 2, 3, 4 years old, and it might last through adolescence or even into adulthood.
Anything else that you want to share, David Ruzicka?
Yeah, I would definitely say that, you know, the good news is that although chronic conditions are prevalent, there are a lot of things that you can do to help yourself, and it's never too late to start helping impact good outcomes. So empower yourself, find out your risk factors, educate yourself, and then connect with a trusted provider who can walk you through and get a good outcome.
Yeah, help each other out. Thank you so much.